episode of INI9. I have with me C. Mohan, who's with the Observer Research Foundation now. And we wanted to talk about US-China relations and India in the East Asian thing. So what's your take? Given the situation now, right, where US is doing its pivot, China is having a leadership transition, what should be India's move?
Right. What we're seeing is actually the Shangri La Summit, for example, the tension between US and China, which is beginning to affect all the institutions and mechanisms that we're seeing in this region. For clearly, the Chinese have sent a message by not showing up at the senior levels. You might recall last year, Minister Li Guangli was present at Shangri La. This time, they've sent really a low-ranking general. And I think, and then we've seen the region today for the first time in 30, 40 years, actually since the end of the Vietnam War, is confronting a situation where the change in the power distribution is beginning to have an effect on everybody here. Now, until now it was assumed, look, China was there, good market, good economic opportunity, and the US was there to take care of their security. What we've seen happen in the last 2 years is the Chinese assertiveness on security issues and the pressure on the United States to do something about it. So that's why the pivot to Asia was about reaffirming American determination to maintain its primacy in East Asia. Meanwhile, the Chinese military power is rising. So I think the fundamental tension between rising Chinese military power and the pressure on the US with fewer resources to deliver its traditional role as the security provider in East Asia. Now that is the context. Now within that, the smaller countries in the region, for the first time, are finding a situation where they need the Americans to balance the Chinese, but at the same time, they don't want to be seen as offending the Chinese. So many of the smaller countries of East Asia are trapped in the situation where they seek American support, they support American presence, but at the same time, they don't want to upset the Chinese. So I think we've seen that play itself out in the conference again. And because the Chinese were not there, some of the Southeast Asians were a little more vocal. Otherwise, the Chinese were present. I mean, there's even more hesitation to speak. So I think the fundamental tension between rising Chinese military power and American forward military presence is going to be with us. And one of the things that Secretary Panetta was doing here was to reassure the Asian neighbors that, look, we're going to be here for a long time to come.
But do you think that this means there is a sort of perception that the US is wanting to fire off India's shoulders?
No, I think.
Or the regional countries, do they see that?
I think as Panetta, what he said was that, look, one, the first priority is to strengthen their traditional alliances, that is Japan, Australia, Korea. That will be the first priority. The second priority is to strengthen new partnerships, that is with Vietnam, Indonesia, India. So we fall into the second category. And the third, they'll continue an engagement with the Chinese. Now, for India, I think we're going to have Secretary Panetta is now traveling to Vietnam from here. He's going to come to India next week. So they want to build a stronger partnership on the military side with India because they want to do, in the context of the rise of Chinese military power, they want more friends and partners in this region. Now for India, I think the challenge is, look, while India is doing well so far, the gap between India and China in military capability terms has expanded. So if India wants to cope with the rise of the Chinese power, it needs the American support in the military modernization. But then we've not been able to move too fast, given the political inhibitions in Delhi. But the question is, the gap with China is going to continue to grow. So how do we resolve that? That India needs a multipolar world. Therefore, occasionally we sit with the Chinese and the Russians talk about a multipolar world. But we also need a multipolar Asia, which is what takes us to the Americans. Yeah. So I think that is the tension in our policy.
Yeah, but if the issue here is that if we are not seen as contributing to the Asian balance of power, at least in East Asia, then the US will be less interested in cooperating with us in other parts, right? So
I think the US is seeing it as a broader framework. I mean, they're not merely seeing it as East Asia versus South Asia. They're seeing the region as Indo-Pacific. So India has a role, because in the Indian Ocean, and somewhat of a less of a role in the Western Pacific. But the US is interested in both, and they see India's future role in Asia growing. You remember Hillary Clinton talking about India must take the leadership role in Asia. Obama talking about India must be East and not merely look East. So I think they're interested in, they see no conflict of interest with India in East Asia. India wants to play a larger role. So there is a marriage of that convergence of those interests.
Yeah,
but the policy in Delhi is still lagging.
Exactly. So when I was talking to people about how Defence Minister Antony was speaking, I mean, Defence Minister Antony's pitch to the people in the bilateral discussion and others was largely about, look, we care about our interests, and our interests are about keeping the shipping lanes open for our traffic and doing what is necessary to defend our own domestic related interests, right? So the idea of a geopolitical space, or that we should contribute to the balance of power, just sort of escaped his worldview.
I think no one is betting on Antony to take leadership and not this bureaucratic leadership in Delhi to imagine the challenges that are rising. So I think there is a certain sense of lag in Delhi today. But my sense is, if the circumstances in the region are going to sharpen, the conflict is going, the tensions are going to mount, I think the demands on India, both to contribute to the balance of power in the region, are going to grow. Meanwhile, India's own balance vis-a-vis China is tilting in favor of China. So whether he wants to, see, you saw the Antony say, we're concerned about Chinese defense expenditure. Because in the same sentence, he also says, but China is not a threat. So I think, since we don't want to be seen as criticizing China, there is that traditional temptation as well. So, but my sense is that this contradiction is not going to go away. That India needs a larger role, more friends in Asia, who feel threatened by China. And India's own position vis-a-vis China is going to become more difficult. So I think the need to work with the US, with Japan, with Australia, with other partners in Southeast Asia becomes even more important in the coming years.
But given us, okay, now it's about looking forward, right? Now, given our domestic political scenario and how it might play out in the next 2-3 years, in the short term, how do you think that it's going to affect the play in Asia?
I think we've already slowed down. I mean, I think if you see the second term of the UPA, there's been no major foreign policy initiative. We've just barely managed to do the routine. So there is a crisis in Delhi in terms of the capacity of the leadership to seize opportunities, or forget seizing opportunities, to actually responding to opportunities or doing what is right for India to do. So I think we're in a stasis. I mean, there's no question Delhi is caught in doldrums. I mean, no one is holding their breath to see if the government will revive into doing something dramatic on the foreign policy front. So I think these 3 years have been a write-off. Hopefully the next 2 are not a write-off. And if they are, then we'll have to wait for a new government, because the rest of the world is not going to wait. Because the pressures on India are going to mount, and there'll be a point when India will have fewer choices, but you'll have to make a judgment call sooner than later.
Okay. On that note, thanks. It was a wonderful discussion. We'll see you again.
Yeah. See you. Thanks.